when my great-aunt passed away. Her peculiar collection of antiques was distributed among the family. She had always been an eccentric woman with a fascination for objects that seemed to carry stories of their own. It wasn't surprising when a package arrived at my doorstep, marked with her distinct handwriting. Inside was a porcelain doll Maria. She was beautiful in an unsettling way. Her face was painted with delicate precision, her lips frozen in a faint smile that somehow felt both inviting and mocking. Her glass eyes sparkled, a pale blue that seemed unnervingly alive, as if they could see far more than they should. Her dress, though faded and yellowed with age, still bore intricate lace details, and at the hem, embroidered in faint cursive, was her name, Maria. I couldn't say why, but the doll unsettled me from the start. Perhaps it was the way her eyes seemed to follow me when I moved, or the weight of her presence in the room. But I chalked it up to my imagination and placed her on the bookshelf in the corner of my living room. She was just a doll, after all, a relic from a bygone era. The first night after Maria's arrival, I dismissed the faint giggle I heard as a trick of the wind. It was late, and I'd been working for hours. The house was old, and it wasn't unusual for it to creak and groan as it settled. Still, I couldn't shake the unease that crept over me as I glanced at Maria. She sat there, unblinking, her head slightly tilted as if she were curious about me. Over the next few days, strange things began happening. Nothing overt, just small, almost imperceptible changes. A cold draft seemed to emanate from the corner where Maria sat, even though the windows were tightly shut. I'd find myself glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone standing there, only to find empty space. But the thing that disturbed me the most was the eyes. Every time I looked at Maria, I could swear her gaze had shifted, subtly but unmistakably. I tried to tell myself it was just the way the light hit the glass, but deep down, I wasn't so sure. By the end of the week, I was convinced I was letting my imagination run wild. I even laughed at myself for feeling uneasy about a doll. "It's just an old keepsake," I muttered, turning her slightly so she faced the wall. But that night, as I turned off the lights and prepared for bed, I caught a faint sound, soft, rhythmic tapping, like the ticking of a clock. I froze, straining to listen. The sound seemed to be coming from the living room. When I flicked on the lights and looked toward the bookshelf, Maria was still there, sitting exactly as I had left her. Only this time, her head wasn't turned toward the wall. She was looking directly at me. The next day, I was more shaken than I wanted to admit. Maria's head had been turned toward me. I was certain of it, but I had no logical explanation. Maybe I had misremembered how I positioned her. Trying to brush off the unease, I decided to leave the house for a while, spending the afternoon running errands and meeting a friend for coffee. When I returned that evening, I was greeted by silence. The house felt colder than usual, a biting chill that sank into my skin as I stepped inside. Maria remained on the bookshelf, her unblinking gaze fixed straight ahead. I avoided looking at her for too long and busied myself with preparing dinner, determined not to let the doll's presence get under my skin again. It was later that night, as I was scrolling through my phone in bed, that it happened. My phone buzzed with an incoming call. The screen displayed unknown number. Frowning, I hesitated before answering. "Hello," I said cautiously. There was silence on the other end, the kind that wasn't just empty, but heavy, as if someone was there listening. I repeated myself, louder this time. And then, faintly, I heard it, a giggle, high-pitched, soft, and unmistakably childlike. "Who is this?" I demanded, my voice shaking slightly. The line went dead. I stared at the phone, my pulse racing. It had to be a prank call, I told myself, even as a deep sense of unease crept over me. I set the phone down, resolving to ignore any further calls from unknown numbers. But it didn't stop. The calls came again, first sporadically, and then with increasing frequency. Every time, the caller would remain silent, save for that haunting giggle. By the third call, I stopped answering altogether, letting the phone buzz incessantly on my nightstand. When I finally checked my missed calls, my heart sank. There were 13 missed calls, all from the same unknown number. At that moment, A sharp creak echoed through the house. My head snapped toward the door of my bedroom. The sound came again, louder this time, as if someone or something was moving in the hallway. Grabbing my phone, I slowly opened the bedroom door. The house was dark, save for the faint glow of a streetlight filtering through the living room window. I stepped cautiously into the hallway, every creak of the floorboards beneath my feet sending a jolt of fear through me. When I reached the living room, my breath caught in my throat. Maria was no longer on the bookshelf. She was sitting on the coffee table, her head tilted to the side, her glassy blue eyes fixed directly on me. And then, from the darkness of the room, my phone buzzed again. The screen lit up, displaying the same two words, unknown number. I couldn't bring myself to answer the phone. My hands trembled as the buzzing persisted, the glow of the screen casting eerie shadows across the room. With a shaky breath, I silenced the call and stared at Maria, her lifeless face now the centerpiece of my growing fear. "What do you want?" I whispered, my voice breaking. Of course, there was no reply. But then the phone buzzed again, and this time, a notification appeared. Voicemail received. My stomach churned as I opened the message. The recording started with static, a crackling white noise that seemed to seep into the air around me. Then came the sound of that same giggle, followed by a faint, distorted voice that sent a chill down my spine. "Why did you leave me?" The words were childlike, yet hauntingly accusatory. I dropped the phone, my breath catching in my throat. This couldn't be happening. This wasn't real. I turned back to Maria. Her head was now tilted further, almost unnaturally so, as if mocking me. "No," I muttered, shaking my head. "I'm imagining things. This is stress, lack of sleep." Desperate to regain control, I grabbed Maria and shoved her into a storage box in the closet, slamming the door shut. I locked it for good measure, as if that would keep her, and whatever was happening, contained. The rest of the night passed in a haze of anxiety. I lay in bed, my eyes fixed on the ceiling, every creak of the house making my heart race. My phone stayed on silent, though the light flashed periodically with new missed calls. I didn't dare check them. When dawn finally broke, I convinced myself I had to get rid of her. The doll was cursed, or I was losing my mind. But either way, Maria had to go. I retrieved the box from the closet and drove to the nearest landfill, refusing to look at her as I tossed the box into the trash heap. The sense of relief was immediate, like a weight had been lifted. But as I drove back home, my phone buzzed again. Another voicemail. With trembling hands, I pressed play. The giggle was louder this time, sharper, followed by the same distorted voice. "I'm coming home." I nearly swerved off the road, my heart hammering in my chest. When I arrived back at the house, I hesitated before stepping inside. Everything seemed normal, quiet, undisturbed. But as I entered the living room, the blood drained from my face. Maria was back. She sat in the exact same spot on the bookshelf, her head tilted slightly, her glassy eyes glinting in the morning light. And this time, her porcelain lips were curled into a faint, eerie smile. I backed away from the bookshelf, my knees trembling. The air felt thick, suffocating, as if the room itself was alive and watching me. "This isn't real," I muttered, clutching my chest as my heart pounded. "It can't be real." But Maria was there, as pristine and malevolent as ever. Her smile seemed to grow wider the longer I stared, her tiny hands poised delicately on her lap. My phone buzzed again, jolting me out of my paralysis. Another voicemail. My instinct screamed at me to ignore it, but curiosity, or desperation, got the better of me. The message began with silence, followed by that same crackling static. Then, her voice came through, clearer than ever. "I'm waiting." I dropped the phone, the sound echoing through the room. My breathing quickened as I scrambled to think of a solution. I had to end this, whatever it was. I grabbed Maria from the shelf, her porcelain surface icy against my skin, and stormed out of the house. This time, I wouldn't settle for a landfill. I drove to the edge of town, where an abandoned quarry loomed like a gaping wound in the earth. Standing at the edge, I hesitated for only a moment before hurling Maria into the abyss. She tumbled end over end, her lifeless form growing smaller and smaller until it vanished into the darkness below. A wave of relief washed over me as I stood there, staring into the void. It was over. It had to be. But as I turned back toward my car, a sharp, piercing giggle cut through the air, stopping me in my tracks. It wasn't distant, it was close, too close. I spun around, scanning the empty landscape. There was nothing, no one, just the wind whistling through the rocks. And then, I felt it, a light touch barely there, against my shoulder. My body froze, my breath hitching. Slowly, I turned my head. There she was, standing behind me. Not the doll Maria. She was human-sized now, her porcelain skin glowing faintly in the dim light, her glassy eyes fixed on mine. Her smile was wide, impossibly wide, revealing rows of jagged, glinting teeth. "You can't leave me," she whispered, her voice soft and chilling. I stumbled back, nearly losing my balance on the edge of the quarry. But Maria didn't move. She simply stood there, watching me, her head tilting ever so slightly. And then, just as suddenly as she had appeared, she was gone. I raced back to my car, my mind spinning, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the keys. The drive home was a blur, my paranoia growing with every shadow that flickered past. When I finally arrived, I slammed the door behind me and locked it. Every lock, every bolt. My house felt like a fortress. But I knew deep down it wouldn't be enough. Maria was out there, and she wasn't done with me. I couldn't sleep that night. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant howl of the wind felt like Maria creeping closer. I sat in the corner of my living room, clutching a kitchen knife, my eyes darting to every shadow that moved. The phone rang again. This time, I didn't jump. I was too far gone, too consumed by dread to even flinch. The screen glowed with unknown caller. My trembling fingers hovered over the decline button, but instead, I answered. Static. Then her voice. "Let me in." The lights flickered, and the room grew colder. The kind of chill that seeped into your bones. I looked toward the front door, and my heart stopped. It was open. Not fully, just ajar, enough to let in the pale moonlight. My pulse raced as I crept toward it, knife in hand. I reached out and pushed it shut, bolting every lock. But when I turned around, she was there. Maria stood in the middle of my living room, her glassy eyes shining with malice. She wasn't alone. Behind her, shadows twisted and writhed, forming grotesque, half-seen shapes. The air was heavy with the scent of decay, and my knees threatened to buckle beneath me. "Why won't you love me?" she asked, her voice a mix of innocence and venom. I backed away, clutching the knife tighter. "You're not real," I stammered. "You're just a doll." Her smile widened, her head tilting unnaturally to the side. "Am I?" Before I could react, the shadows surged forward, enveloping me. The world spun, and I was no longer in my living room. I stood in a void, endless and dark. Maria was everywhere. Her laughter, her voice, her face flickering in and out of the darkness. I screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the void. Then silence. When I woke, I was back in my house. The sun was rising, its warm light spilling through the windows. Everything seemed normal, too normal. Maria was gone. The phone was gone. Even the knife I had been holding was missing. I wanted to believe it was over, that I had survived whatever nightmare had taken hold of my life. But deep down I knew better. As I stepped outside, the morning air cool against my skin, I noticed something on the porch. A small package, neatly wrapped in brown paper, with no return address. My hands shook as I picked it up and tore it open. Inside was Maria, her porcelain face flawless, her smile serene. And beneath her, a note scrawled in crimson ink. "You can never leave me." The world seemed to tilt as I stared at the doll. I wanted to scream, to throw her as far away as I could, but all I could do was stand there, paralyzed, as her glassy eyes seemed to lock onto mine. Maria wasn't just a doll. She was a curse, a tether to something far beyond my understanding, and she was never letting me go.